even if we don't use this idea of choice, if verse 5 says that we are predestined for adoption to himself. So this adoption was destined to happen before it did happen. So,
right.
So God knew and had the plan to bring us to himself before we were in Christ.
Well, I would stop you there and say, but who is it that Paul's defining as predestined? The people who are being described here as predestined, are they those who are outside of Christ? Aren't they in Christ? And he's describing the condition of those people who are already in Christ. Does that make sense? So he's not saying before you are in Christ, you are predestined.
The experience of having been predestined, the actualization of that, the realization in our sense is far different from God's understanding of this idea. So God, I would say that God is, he's not constrained by time in the same way that we are. And so his understanding of our spiritual state, he sees that in the present time, someone who's not currently saved is still under judgment if they were to die. But he, of course, knows that they will continue to live. And at the moment they do come to Christ, at the moment that they are reconciled, then they are actually saved. They have been adopted. But he says that this adoption that we are predestined for, it is predestined. It came before the actual adoption itself. And so, yes, this only applies to people who are saved. But it was true of us before we were saved.
And I think that's probably where the biggest disagreement there would come, because again, like I can't get around the fact that this phrase is repeated over and over, this concept of in him. And here where he says he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, this all is contained. This is a spiritual blessing that is entirely contingent, dependent on whether or not you are presently in Christ.
So you would say you were not predestined for adoption to himself before you were in Christ?
Yes, I think I would say that. I would say that in as much as you are a person who is, if you are in Christ, in other words, if you are joined to Christ, then you are predestined. And so I'd say, like, to maybe make it more clear, are we counted righteous before we are in Christ? Well, I think, of course not. How could God look at us and say, you are righteous, until we are first joined to the righteous one? And so my confusion with Calvinism is like, that element of forgiveness of sins, righteousness, it's listed, it continues to be listed further on in Ephesians 1, as if it's in the same category of spiritual blessings as being predestined. And so in the same way, I was not righteous. I had not been crucified with Christ. I had not been buried with him until I was joined to him. And in the same way that Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me, apart from me you can do nothing. I think that metaphor perfectly fits into what we're talking about. Because again, I think it's not until we were grafted into the vine, which is Christ, we didn't have anything. We had no spiritual blessing, including this aspect of being chosen or predestined. All these things, again, that I think are aspects of reconciliation with the Father. I don't think we had any element of reconciliation until we became connected to the vine, which is Christ.
So that aspect, this idea of aspects of reconciliation, I don't believe that chosenness is reconciliation, and I don't think that most Calvinists would say that to be chosen is to be presently chosen is to be presently reconciled. So there are people, of course, in the world right now at this very moment that are not saved, but I would say that are chosen. And so this idea
let me ask you this: are those people that you just referred to, though, are they in Christ right now?
Not yet.
So how, if Ephesians 1 is telling us that being chosen is in Christ, then how are these people that are not yet chosen, or not yet in Christ, chosen?
Again, so I would say it's that they were chose. He chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world. So this idea of in Christ is we are chosen either to be in Christ or through Christ. That's right. That's what I would say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And we can try to wrap. I don't want to hold you too long.
Oh no, I've got plenty of time.
Okay, I mean, I could go for hours on this, obviously, but I don't want to push you too much. But what I would say to that again is that I think represents one of the reasons I have great issue with Calvinism and how they deal with this text, and because what you just said again, the way you're interpreting this and putting this spiritual blessing of chosen, applying that again, just as you said, to people who are not yet saved, or as you just said, not yet in Christ, but yet they're chosen. That requires you to then change the wording here, where it says He chose us in Him, to be to say He chose us to be in Him, or He chose us through Him. So it's almost like the wording here seems to demand that this interpretation that there is a lost person right now who is currently chosen. This seems to fly in the face of it so clearly that you almost have to change the wording to make it fit. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to like jump on you or anything. I just feel like this is one of my pet peeves, honestly, with the way I've seen Calvinists interpret this in the past, and I'm passionate about it because I think it just misses the significance of what Paul's trying to get across when he's talking about in Him. And so how does that work? Because you had to change the wording of in Him to be in Him. I would just say that it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that, though.
Yeah, and I would say, in a similar sense, it also says, He chose us in Him. It doesn't say He chose us who are in Him. And I'm not a Greek scholar by any sense, but I would. Yeah, ultimately,
go ahead.
I think it comes down to the fact that it doesn't always refer to a union with a spiritual location. These sorts of things. In has multiple definitions, and so I'm not necessarily changing the words. I'm just not using the single definition of as we've delineated in this conversation of union with.
Okay.
Rather as a means by which, or a medium by which.
Yeah. Right. Which I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with using it or speaking about it in terms of like the means. I think Christ is the means. Mm-hmm. But I guess so here it says, in Him we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses. So it almost seems like the way he's using this phrase in Him here, you would have to say it means something different than what he means here. Does that make sense?
I could still be consistent in that, because He has blessed us through Christ with every spiritual blessing, or by the means of Christ with every spiritual blessing. In the same way, in verse 7, through the means of Christ we have redemption. So I could still be consistent in that way.
But doesn't this in Him demand that there is a present relationship? Like there is a connection to Christ that is happening here. There's the reconciliation, or the faith has been put in Christ to where the one who has redemption and forgiveness has been joined to Jesus, has been made one with him.
Yes, so that this idea of union, yes, is tied in with this verse. So the redemption is being brought back into that union, but in him, I would say, doesn't necessarily mean union.
So okay, so with that, I guess my question from that, what I was hoping to get at, is just a little bit more clarity about why here the in him, it seems to me very clearly being a condition that is being met in order for these people to have redemption through his blood, forgiveness of sins, the riches of his grace.
I guess I should ask you, why is that so clear to you?
Why is what so clear?
You said it's clear that in him is a contingency, is the prerequisite for those things. Why is that? What's your intuition there? Why is it clear to you?
Well, I would say because that's what he's telling us. I mean, why is he over and over saying this is in Christ? You have this in Christ. You have this. You've been forgiven in him. You've been seated with Christ in him. You've been predestined in the beloved. Like, I don't think this is just a fancy, like, tag on that he's putting here. He's like, this is the condition that these people are in. I mean, he starts out, if you look in verse 1, the people he's addressing, he says, to the saints who are in Ephesus and are faithful in Christ Jesus. So he's describing and talking to people who are meeting this certain condition, being that they are presently in Christ. They are defined as people who are in Christ, which again, I think is just baptism. It's this idea of being baptized in Christ. These are people who are now identified with Christ.
So why couldn't any of this apply to people who are not currently in present union with Christ?
I think because of what you just said, because they're not in Christ. they have not been grabbed.
What in the passage leads you to believe that it's exclusive to people who are currently in union with Christ?
Well, I feel like that question kind of answers itself, because I feel like the passage is just, again, it's telling us that, isn't it? I mean, why is he saying in Christ over and over again? And again, I'm not a Greek scholar, and I might be wrong on this, but I would guess if you dig into the wording here, I bet the terminology being used even has within it ideas of like a present and active state.
In the Blue Letter Bible, there's an option. It's the I think it's the Strong's. This is the Thayer's Greek lexicon.
Okay, I have that actually. So let me pull it up.
Perfect.
Which verse?
So I hope we're looking at the same thing. So Thayer's Greek lexicon, the verse Ephesians 1:3.
Is that what you're looking for?
So this is the entire entry for the Thayer's Greek lexicon. And so if we find the place where it references Ephesians 1:3, it's under this. It's under D. So number 5, used of that with which a person is surrounded, equipped, furnished, assisted, or acts. And then that's A, B, C, D. And in D, specifically, it says with or by means of, by, through.
Go ahead and follow through with what your point is. So
this, at least these people who made Thayer's, they decided for whatever reason of their Greek knowledge to say that Ephesians 1:3, in talking about people who are blessed in Christ with every spiritual blessing, are this in Christ is in talking about by the means of,
right?
Rather than,
which I don't disagree with that definition. By the way, like I don't. I feel like that fits pretty well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that continues on in this passage, that these in Christs are not specifically about the union, but are rather about the means by which a thing is achieved. And I believe that if this thing has been achieved in you, there is a contingency of union. But the text itself, I think, is saying that these things are achieved by Christ, rather than if you have these things, or if these things apply to you, you are presently united with Christ. Are you tracking with me?
I am, I think, to an extent, and I don't necessarily disagree with some of what you're saying, because I don't disagree with using the terminology of, we were chosen by means of Christ. But I guess, again, my question comes down to, I feel like Ephesians 1 to me, again, is falling right in line with and I would guess most commentators would agree with this concept, again, that I brought up from Romans 6, of this is speaking of a baptism into Christ. And this is something I maybe we can both go away and look at into what is meant by this in him terminology that to me is pretty clearly, and I get why you're asking me why it's so clear. And so I sympathize with that, but to me it is pretty clear in my mind, the way I perceive what Paul is trying to get across, that it's the same as Ephesians or Romans 6. It's just speaking about this baptism, this identification with Jesus. I think it's Paul describing in detail what it means to be grafted into the vine. It's almost as if he's taken that analogy and like going into great detail to describe it and to say, if you are in him, if you've been grafted, if you are a branch that has connected to Jesus, then the fruit of that, what's going to come into you through the vine, by means of the vine. I don't have any problem with any of that terminology. I think it complements what I'm trying to say. But it all comes in as much as there is a present connection to Christ. And I think, to me, that's the clear implications of Ephesians 1.
So I looked up in Romans 6, one of the verses, it has this same "in" used, and the definition there is ingrafted, as it were, in Christ, in fellowship and union with Christ, with the Lord. And so this idea that you're talking about, that sounds pretty spot on with what you're saying. And so I guess I'll just have to chalk it up to somebody who might know a little bit more about Greek than I do. But it does talk about this as in a different state, a means by which, as opposed to this ingraftedness, this fellowship and union.
So are you saying that's the same word as in Ephesians, or the wording in Romans is different?
The word is the same in that. Okay,
I see. So it does imply an idea of fellowship, or it is just a little bit bewildering to me why this concept is not more adequately looked at, unpacked, and especially in this conversation about Calvinism, why is it not taken into more consideration? I feel like this is a big deal that I think needs to begin to be taken into more account in this conversation between Calvinists and non-Calvinists, and I think it's often incredibly neglected, and I literally don't understand why.
I agree. I guess, to briefly summarize, I think we got off into the weeds a bit, but I guess just the point at which we really disagree is what "in" means, is whether it's by the means of or whether it's in union with.